Welcome to Wellesley. I hope you've been enjoying family and friends weekends so far. My name's Amy Johnson. I'm a senior, which I can't believe these 4 years are flying by, but I'm a sociology and Spanish double major, and I'm here introducing Professor Lee Cuba. Professor Cuba has served as my mentor here at Wellesley since my freshman year fall semester when I took his introductory sociology course. And that class basically made me decide to become a sociology major. It actually has continued my passion in sociology, and I'm applying to graduate school for the fall. Sociology at Wellesley, and especially Professor Cuba, have just meant so much to me in terms of my time here. I've been working as Professor Cuba's research assistant also since my freshman fall. I love the class so much, I walked straight into Professor Cuba's office and said, how can I get involved? How can I do more? And he told me he was working on this project here, and I've been doing that for the last 2.5 years. The research that we've been doing took place at 8 different liberal arts colleges in the New England area, and it culminated in this book here, which is called Practice for Life. And it was just published in August through Harvard University Press. And this book is a really thorough and interesting understanding of what it means to attend a liberal arts college and what this type of education can uniquely provide to students. As you can kind of tell by our title, liberal arts colleges serve as practice for real life, and that the decisions that you make in college will kind of echo out and affect the way that you make decisions throughout the rest of your life. This book also makes a great case for why liberal arts colleges are incredibly important, and I would really recommend the book to parents like my dad, who wanted me to major in computer science and work in technology, and I think this book really shows that a liberal arts education can allow a student to do anything they want in the rest of their life. So with that being said, I'll introduce Professor Cuba to talk kind of about what the chapters of the book and what he has to say.
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate your coming today. And what you should know is Amy introduced me at one of these events 2 or 3 years ago as well, so I'm really grateful for her coming back each time. And grateful to you for coming in on such a lovely day to hear a little bit about the work that we've been doing. This is my first opportunity to speak to a room of parents, or people, many of you I know are parents and here for the weekend, so it's a special opportunity for me. This is a project that's been going on for a long time, and one, as Amy suggested, that we're trying to reach a very broad audience. Students in high school and their parents, college students and their parents, and of course faculty and college administrators. So I have too much to say, but I'm going to try to give you a taste of all of the chapters and the main ideas that we raise in this book. I'm also indebted, I should say, to my co-authors on the book too, are from Bowdoin College, Nancy Jennings and Suzanne Lovett, and Joseph Swingle, who's my colleague in sociology here at Wellesley. So here's what we'll do today. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about this background of this project that Amy mentioned to you in the context of a larger study that I've been involved in for the last 10 years. We're going to focus on 5 areas of decision making that students are occupied with in college: time, connection, home, advice, and engagement. And then I want to conclude with what are, I guess, best thought of as takeaways. They're going to be phrased in terms of the student experience, but I think they're instructive for us as faculty or you as parents as a way of thinking about how you might talk to college students. Again, as Amy mentioned, this is a multi-college study that started in 2006 with the class of 2010 at all of these liberal arts colleges you see here. Bates, Bowdoin, and Colby colleges in Maine, Middlebury in Vermont, Smith and Wellesley, as you know, 2 single-sex colleges in Massachusetts, and Trinity in Hartford, Connecticut. We started out with about 250 students in a panel study. A panel study is when you identify some people at the beginning of a process and then you follow them along. So you can't just, if they drop out of your study, it's a shame because you don't know what's going to happen to them. But the beauty of longitudinal studies like this are that you can see where people end up and where they started out. And more importantly, as we could talk about maybe afterwards, you can't make it up afterwards. If you were taught to 4 years ago, we actually know what you said. The interviews themselves were all done by students, of other students, and Amy, in fact, participated in interviewing some alums in this project. We interviewed students every semester while they were in college, 3 times their first year, actually, and then every semester. If they studied away, we Skype interviewed them or interviewed them wherever they were. We interviewed them a year after graduation and just finished last summer, not this one, but the summer before, talking to them 5 years out. So some of these students we know pretty well. What did we ask them about? Every semester in college, we asked them about their academic experiences, of course, about every class. What's your best class? What's your worst class? Why is it your best class or worst? What are your interactions with faculty like, and so on and so forth. We asked them, because we're all residential liberal arts colleges, we asked them a lot about their residence life, their friendships, the kind of things that they were doing in the communities, in the colleges that they were attending. A third group of questions we call life management. They're questions that are related to emerging adulthood. How do you balance all the things that you want to do? How do you allocate your time? How do you make decisions about what you're going to do each week? And then the last group of questions that we talked about were in some ways the most interesting. They were either forward or backward looking questions where we asked students to reflect a bit about their college experience. We asked students, for example, every fall, what would make this a successful year for you? And that was one of the most interesting questions that we wrote a paper about, I think, in this project. We asked them at the end of the sophomore year, how do you think you've changed since coming to college, and things like that. So what emerged from our analyses of these interviews, well over 200 of them, was the importance of how students make decisions in college, both about their academic and their social lives. Colleges create spaces for students in which they must make many decisions, and importantly, many decisions in the face of ambiguity. There aren't right or wrong answers to most of them. Most college stakeholders, administrators, faculty, students, and I think parents, tend to focus on the formal decisions that happen infrequently, like declaring a major, but tend to give far less attention to the informal ones that occur almost every day, like deciding to talk to a professor after class or balancing commitments you have for a given week. But all the decisions, this is part of the point we're trying to make in the book, have a potential to affect what happens to you while you're in college. Now, students can see their decision making in one of two ways. They can either see it as an opportunity for change, an opportunity for reflection, or an opportunity to learn something about themselves, or they can see decision making as an obstacle course for which the best approach is to minimize risk and reduce uncertainty. In figuring things out, seeing decisions as either opportunities or obstacles, college students find themselves caught up in a process of self-creation and recreation. The decisions that students face, the number of different tasks and experiences that they have, even the structure of college itself, every year, every semester, every break, mean that students have frequent opportunities to reimagine and recreate themselves. Students don't just start college and then finish it, they start and restart college many times. So the broad argument of our book, as Amy mentioned to you, is that college offers practice at making and then reflecting on decisions that build foundational skills, habits, and values associated with liberal education. And we focus on 5 of those in the book. The first 3 are reorientations that are common to any time you change locations and move to a new place. The way in which you find time and manage balance in a new setting, the way in which you make new friends that can provide personal and social support, and then establishing a sense of home in a place that you didn't grow up in. The other 2, advice and engagement, all have some bearing on the intellectual and inquisitive orientation we hope that students will acquire in college. How to ask for personalized advice, and how to become a lifelong learner, and find meaning in work. So I want to address all of those briefly today, and we're going to start with time, which I think is actually one of the most interesting chapters in the book. College is, of course, by definition, a temporal experience, but students don't experience every year or time in college in a uniform way. Absent the highly structured and densely populated schedules of high school, students new to college will often spend a good deal of time figuring out how best to deal with newfound freedoms and unfamiliar course schedules and professors. Once they've arrived at viable strategies for managing time, they quickly come to see college as a serial decision-making process, punctuated by deadlines. Years in which important decisions have to be made, decisions about declaring a major, fulfilling requirements, studying away, finding a job, often feel compressed and stressful. Whereas other years may seem, or at least give the illusion of being, more expansive. The series of deadlines attached to the decisions students make in college orients them often towards the future. So that's what Henry's talking about. This is an interview with Henry in October of his sophomore year, and he says, in response to, what's most on your mind? That was another good question, I think, that we asked, very open-ended one. And what does Henry say? First of all, I felt like, wow, my college career is about to come to an end. It's the beginning of his sophomore year, remember? Maybe that's kind of early to start thinking about it, but I felt like, wow, I only have my junior and senior year left. And so that kind of hit me, and then I started thinking about graduate school and stuff. Like, what do I need to do for that? What are the requirements? I'm taking my test next year, all that stuff. So I started planning for that and picking a major. Well, I felt like I was pretty set with that because I kind of knew what I was doing. Okay. Again, we could talk more about it, but we argue in the book that making the decision of what to major in is kind of the one that students see as the most important decision they'll make in college. And once it's made, one that orients them towards being out of college. Compare Henry to Jason. Jason talked a lot about that future orientation in his senior year interviews. After declaring that, quote, it's very easy to be wrapped up in the productive mindset here and to forget about the value of taking a walk in the quiet with someone, or no longer being a slave to time, he answered this question: what would you have done? How would you have used your time differently? And he says, I would have been much more selective with who and what I'm giving it to. I think it's really important to have the freedom to forget about time. I think that's one we should always realize that time is a non-renewable resource, and the ways that we use it, everything that we do, every way that we use our time is a choice to not use it in a million other ways. So there's only 24 hours in a day. We have to just give people that we love, the activities that we love, the time they deserve. Yeah, I think that's important, and it's something that I'm only learning this year. That's not actually true about Jason. He talks about this in his sophomore year, but he's a rare bird. There aren't too many Jasons on our campuses. Connection. Friends motivate and sustain students as they confront the uncertainties of college life. Recognizing this, colleges jumpstart students' initial efforts to make friends by assigning what they hope will be compatible roommates and organizing social events. Most students prioritize making friends, and they tend to do so quickly by connecting to those close to them: roommates, floormates, doormates. Residential college life, though, harbors many restarts that can be, to varying degrees, socially disruptive. Housing lotteries every year can put friends on opposite ends of a campus. Studying abroad can put them on opposite ends of the globe. Restarts provide fertile ground for students to take stock of current friendships and to consider what they find rewarding or not rewarding about them. They can lead students to confront change and uncertainty by choosing to rely on established friendships, or they can inspire students to make new ones. Most students are like Dan, the student who's quoted here, whom we describe as going deep in terms of making and keeping friends. He committed to close friends early in his first year and counted on them throughout his years in college. Dan described his friends as inspiring and motivating. They were a memorable part of his college experience, not just because of the good times he had with them, but because their friendship furthered his intellectual and personal growth. By contrast, Sonia embraced the social fluidity, of college life. Friends and an openness to new social connections were a priority for her each year, and she successfully navigated social barriers that others found formidable. Like most students, Sonia established close friendships, but unlike other students, she didn't feel socially constrained by them. So when asked if her friendships had changed over college, Sonia kind of came in with a chip on her shoulder, you should know, about being in college and her friends. And she said, well, I thought that these people were really boring. I don't mean really boring or but don't have the same values. And so you go through the phase of finding yourself and finding people that you actually go well with. So she begins by acknowledging that it starts with proximity and then moves out. But also I went through a reconciliation with the people in my dorm. I softened towards them this year. They're not boring. They're just different, and it's worth exploring the difference. So during her 4 years of college, Sonia does very well. She racks up a whole bunch of achievements, both academic and social. And when she was asked at the end how college changed her, or how she's changed in college, she said, "I wouldn't say that college is the reason I did change. It's because I also met people that showed me the way to learn these things. It's because I also met people that went to study abroad program, and that helped me too, and my roommate did as well. You know, so in that way, yes, college was for me a turning point." The third area we look at is home. For most students, until they go to college, home hasn't been something that they've had to think much about or to define. Colleges, however, require that students do their own homemaking. For some, college will be a place where they'll thrive academically, yet one that they never really feel at home in. For other students, college may feel like home very, very quickly, but a home that they may be ready to leave once the senior year arrives. While friends and social life of college often figure prominently into how students come to feel at home in college, Oma's story reminds us that there's a sense of belonging that can come via other routes. Oma moved from a large city in the South. She's African American and is attending a predominantly white college in New England. Soon after, in her first interview, she described herself as, quote, outside of her comfort zone. In the first semester, she called her parents and high school friends daily. She sought counseling to deal with homesickness. People she met at college seemed quite different from her old friends, but she did find a friend with whom she started an organization for students who identified as being African. This organization met regularly and got Oma connected to peers with whom she felt she had something in common. They cooked together, and Oma said, "I felt really good personally because I thought it smelled like home. It just felt like home for once." In her sophomore year, Oma decides to major in history with a concentration in African history, and one of her history professors becomes her academic advisor, as well as a very important mentor to her, both academically and personally. Oma's academic interests and her advisor were foundational to her beginning to create a home at college. Nonetheless, at the end of the sophomore year, she was still doubtful about ever calling college home. As she says, "It's just not home for me because it's very different. It's not anything that I can just say, well, if you make this better, I'll feel at home." It's just not going to be. In her 4 years of college, Oma navigated an environment that didn't feel particularly welcoming to her, but one in which she learned to thrive. Oma never called college home, but she developed a sense of belonging there. And she is not without regrets, so she was not without regrets as she was leaving. She thought she may have focused too much on her coursework in response to her ambivalence about the social life at her college. When asked what advice she would offer an incoming student as a senior, she said, "It's not just 4 years of school, it's 4 years of everything. And I would advise people to do things outside of courses. Because I mean, it's college, you're supposed to do work, blah, blah, blah. But it's also like you're 21 or 22, and by the time you get out of here, you should be getting a lot more out of this than just academics," which I didn't do. Advice. Colleges and universities, many of us, especially the kind of college that Wellesley in, spends a lot of time designing, debating, redesigning, redebating, redesigning, advising programs for new students that come to college. First-year students are in particular linked to faculty around the process of course registration. But what we found in our work is that for many students, those initial advising relationships don't go very far, and many students view them as obstacles to be avoided. They're unable to develop a level of comfort with their advisor for a host of reasons, but quite often it has to do with what they see as a mismatch. They're interested in political science, and here I am talking to a sociologist. I'm interested in biology, why am I with this English professor? And so on and so forth. Sam's one of those people, and I want to talk a bit about him as someone who really never comes to see advising as an opportunity while he's in college. Sam liked that his first-year advisor was teaching his political science course, so he's in the course with his advisor, because he, quote, wanted to establish a connection now. Sam was intending to be a poli-sci major. But their relationship quickly stalled because the course was not what he expected. Sam only met with her for course registration, and even then, it was only to tell her, as he said, which courses he was going to take rather than to ask her for advice. Sam later reflected that he had, quote, if he had had, a better relationship with her, I probably would have sought her for more help. In the spring of his sophomore year, Sam declares a major in political science and chooses for his major advisor a professor he never met and someone he wouldn't meet until well into his junior year. When asked if he wanted to have close relationships with his professors, Sam responded that he thought it should be important, but he didn't think it was necessarily important to him. So he says, I guess somewhere within me I feel like I need something to justify talking to the professor. But that isn't the case. I mean, you should just go up and strike up a conversation with them so that you see each other as people as opposed to the professor and the student. So you better understand each other. And I haven't taken advantage of that, and that's not good. As Sam started his senior year, he was most excited about, quote, getting his thesis over with. Sam's meeting with his major advisor around his thesis started off pretty bumpy. He said, I haven't had the most open communication in terms of what his expectations are and what I'm providing. A lot of times it's like we're talking on different radio waves. Although Sam and his advisor met weekly, they never developed a strong relationship. One professor said that I was impervious to criticism, Sam declares as a senior. Quote, I don't know if she meant it as a compliment or not, but I'd like to think it was a compliment. So it's hard to tell if Sam's reluctance to consult with faculty was because he didn't want to hear what they were going to say, or because he didn't believe they had anything to offer him in their advice. In either case, it was a missed opportunity. Finally, engagement. This is, again, I think one of the better chapters in our book. We're trying to understand what engages students and how that works as they go through selecting their courses and being in them. What we found, or what we arrived at, is that students experience engagement in college, we believe, when they're focused on acquiring or creating new knowledge, when they're intrinsically motivated to learn, and when they derive pleasure from doing so. So it's a sense of being caught up with a study or a particular aspect of what they're doing. Engagement, we argue, is linked to very specific things, to decisions about specific classes, assignments, professors, pedagogies, subjects, and methodologies. As a consequence, it really isn't possible to describe students as being engaged students or unengaged students. They have engaging and unengaging experiences throughout college, and their pattern of engagement varies based on the academic decisions they make. So here I want to talk about Dan. He's a good example of a student who figures out, while he's in college, what engages him and then acts on that knowledge. Dan loved to debate what he called big ideas and ask big questions, and that led him to the philosophy department when he started college. And he talked particularly about a course that he took in his first semester in the philosophy of religion. Dan said, does God exist? Can you define the nature of God? I really liked dissecting those questions and tried multiple times to start arguments with my friends. And so being in a class with readings and a professor, it definitely piqued my interest and really engaged me in something that I've been looking forward to for taking for a long time. Dan took more philosophy courses in his first 2 years of college. He liked logic, he liked environmental philosophy, courses that helped clarify his thinking about some issues. As a junior, he took courses that he needed to complete his major, ancient philosophy and modern political thought. He was pretty unengaged in those courses and a little stunned as to why. In reflection, Dan came to understand that it wasn't philosophy as a discipline that engaged him, but something else. And here's what he said. First quote, I really don't care about topics that philosophy actually covers. What I care more about is reading an argument, dissecting, he uses that word again, the argument, and objecting to the argument, or proving it, or thinking of a new argument or coming up with an analogy. In the summer before his senior year, Dan interned in a state legislator's office and found the work fascinating. When asked in the fall of his summer, when asked in the following fall if his summer experience has changed his academic plans, Dan replied, yes, because I know I'm interested in public policy, and that's the career path I see in myself. I have definitely started to take some classes this semester that reflect that. If I found out that I really didn't like working in the legislator's office, I might not be pursuing these classes. In his senior year, Dan abandoned the idea of doing an honors project in philosophy and instead concentrated on political science and history courses on American politics, American policies. Originally, Dan gravitated towards philosophy because those courses allowed him to discuss big ideas and moral questions that he realized that was what really engaged him about those courses. It was critical analysis and argumentation that really kind of floated his boat. So Dan's passion wasn't a disciplinary one, but tied to a set of methodologies and approaches to questions. But nonetheless, it resulted in his path through college as one of sustained engagement. By contrast, we would argue in what we write that most students aren't like Dan. Most students are episodically engaged while they're in college, and we actually have quite a bit of negative things to say about the major in the way that it may or may not prove as a path to engagement for students. We could talk about that in just a minute. We're almost done. So I want to end with a quote from Cindy, who's being interviewed now 1 year out of college. And here's the question: what was the most important thing you learned about yourself in college? Cindy says, I'm not quite sure what I did learn about myself in college. I guess I learned how to make decisions for myself. I think that's a very general and basic thing people learn while they're in college. These decisions that may have seemed for me at one point very out of the blue and very random, such as joining this club or choosing to focus on art history as opposed to history. They were huge decisions for me and altered the course of how my life played out during college and post-college. So learning how to weigh options and make decisions was probably a pretty significant thing to learn and practice. A salesperson for our book, I think, here. So you saw this image, I showed it to you at the beginning when I was talking to you about making decisions in college and the way in which they might often appear to students as some of this being much larger than others. This is Cindy's corrective, I think, is that it makes a lot of sense, and from her point of view, to think about all the decisions people make in college as potentially very important ones for them. So the first takeaway is simply that, is that every decision you make in college is a way of, has the potential to restart your path through college, if you think about it and if you think about why you made it. A second takeaway, this is again, try to be a Jason rather than a Henry. And that's very, very hard to do. It's hard to do in all of our lives. It's particularly hard to do in college. But again, the potential benefit of doing that, the payoff's pretty great. The third, remain open to new friendships. Don't come to college thinking you're going to make your friends for life in your first year. You might not, but don't shut yourself off from continuing to think of yourself as someone who can make new friends. Fourth, use your time in college to figure out what makes you feel at home in a place in which you didn't grow up. That's actually been the research question that's driven my entire academic career. I've been interested in how people who didn't grow up somewhere come to feel at home there. And I think it's something that students have a real opportunity to learn from and to benefit from in college. Chances are, by the way, you're going to have many homes in the way through life. Fifth, think of your college as your first opportunity to network. To find people who have something to offer you in terms of their advice or their wisdom. Don't use filters. Don't screen out people, for example, on the basis of perceived common interests to limit your search for meaningful advice. Don't be a Sam about that. And finally, be proactive in finding engaging academic experiences. Don't expect them to come to you bundled in any neat way, particularly in the form of a major. It simply doesn't work that way for most students. And it should be also an expectation that you're not going to love every class you take. And yeah, I talked about one of these last year that she was taking, but Amy did a course correction and figured out with the professor what wasn't going right and how to make it a course that she actually ended up enjoying a great deal. But it takes some time, it takes some figuring out to do that. And I think we'll stop there and have some time for questions, please. Thank you so much for coming today. Thank you. Questions? Comments? Yes?
Thank you. I'm thinking about what Cindy just said about decision making, and she was making pretty basic decisions, and that was something that she found important. Have you seen over time with students that there's the possibility that students aren't making enough decisions on their own before they come to college, and that is something then that they're hit by a cascade of decisions that they have to make, which will inevitably lead to some good and bad ones?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and the answer is yes. I think that many students arrive at college, especially think about the tier of schools we're looking at, right? These are some of the best in the country. Many students come and they've worked very hard in high school, been very successful in high school, and they believe that what they did will be transferable to college. And many times it's not. I'm talking about study habits, I'm talking about ways in which you kind of rejuvenate yourself. I think there is a lot of constant, I wouldn't call it scaffolding so much, but Jeffrey Arnett's work on emergent adulthood is very much evident in our work, that students arrive at college thinking that they'll be able to do some things, but find themselves, in fact, much more on their own than they would have anticipated. So it's, I mean, part of what is difficult about all of these issues, if you think about it, before students arrive and after they leave, there are a lot of countercurrents to all of these things, right? Slow down, take it easy, you know, be in the moment and things. And it's very, very hard for students while they're here to do that. It's our job, I think, as faculty and as college administrators to try to do that as much as we can. So I hope that answers your questions. Yes, please. Yeah, Jen.
I wonder what some takeaway messages would be for faculty from this project.
Yeah.
I often see students that are so overwhelmed by the number of decisions they have to make, they're really paralyzed, and so I find myself telling them not to sweat the small stuff, but now as I listen to you, maybe that's the wrong advice because you're saying these small decisions are actually really consequential. So what are some ways that colleges, institutionally, or faculty as individuals can take from your research to develop better practices?
Yeah, right, that's a really good point too, because it's easy, like I said, we don't want to go in the other direction and all of a sudden, right, oh, you know, I can't get out of bed because I can't make all those decisions today. It's a bit paralyzing. I think what it's done for most of us is think about how we talk to students, especially in our initial conversations with them. Don't start talking about what courses they want to take right away. Don't start asking them what they think they want to major in. Ask them, you know, why are they here? What would make this a successful year for you? Reorient the conversation early on. And I think part of the problem we have as colleges and universities is that those initial meetings are so tied to course registration that it makes a lot of sense for why the student and the faculty member think that they're to talk about courses. But it's easy enough to move that just a little bit. So I think what we've actually done at Wellesley and some of the other schools is that the first interview schedule that we developed for this project, we use some of those questions now as kind of standard advising questions to students. And also to get them to think about, again, now what's your best class? Because quite often the answer will come back, oh, it's that one because I'm making an A in it, right? But say, well, what is it about that class other than you're making an A in it? So to kind of push back a little bit on conversations about that. Yes, please.
Do you see common personality traits between kids who take decision making as obstacles versus opportunities? And is there, I mean, other than the intervention by the academic professor who's enlightened enough to relate to them in these terms, what other support is there for kids to be able to make that transition, to become better decision makers and not so scared or paralyzed by decisions?
Yeah. So you're asking a sociologist about personality traits, which I don't know very much about that at all. I think one of the things that I think that our research is actually has a very hopeful message, which is it's not like if you do these 5 things you'll be all set, or it's not like if you don't start off on this path you're going to end up as a disaster in college. There are many opportunities to think about reframing what you're doing, and I think that kind of and a very simple other example. We write about in the chapter on time about 2 students who are new to college. And they're both struggling with, you know, how do I manage all of these things that are going on now, again, unscaffolded in some ways from high school. One student takes on the perspective of, what I need to worry about is balance. she talks a little bit like Jason. I need to figure out what's important for me to do and spend my time on that. I need to realize that I don't need to study for everything in the same way, and so on and so forth. Whereas another student, the one we compare with, focuses on time management. So she basically makes schedules and calendars and everything up all the time and fills in all the space. And I think orientation towards that again, to try to turn the perspective slightly, because they're both dealing with the same issue. And there is a way of reframing it or thinking of it in a certain way that I think can be helpful to students. And I think, just reiterating, I think, so I go back to the first part of your question, I'm sorry to be so tongue-tied. I don't think there's a certain type of student who is, resistant to change over and over again. I think there are students who are resistant to change in certain spheres and not in others. And it's, again, we try to avoid categorizing students as this or that, and more to think about the experiences they have to which they respond in making decisions as this or that. If that makes sense. Thank you. Please.
Yesterday, I attended another presentation, a lecture, the new College to Career Education Initiative on campus here. How do you see that fitting in with some of the opportunities and challenges that you're presenting?
Yeah. Oh wow. I'm trying to think of what I should say out loud here. I'm a little worried about students' future orientation, and like I said, coming to college and then thinking about being out of college. So to the extent that programs like the career programs ground students in the present with some thought to the future, I have mixed feelings about it, I guess I'm trying to say. I think that it's important to make sure that students who graduate from a place like Wellesley or any place has a very, very strong educational. I would like them to be in the present as much as they can. So to the extent that they get drawn to the future, I'm ambivalent about that a little bit. I'm also, some of you may know that Wellesley has a first semester shadow grading program for new students, and this research played heavily into the adoption of that program at the college. Now, whether or not we keep it after the next 2 years, we'll see. But in part, that was motivated by the idea that if you were to take your first semester and use it as an opportunity to think about what your strengths and your not so strengths and your weaknesses are and work on those, knowing that you don't have to worry every moment about is it an A- or a B+, that might provide you with a stronger foundation as you begin college. So, and in all fairness, I shouldn't really speak to a particular initiative because I'm not all that familiar with it myself. Yes, please.
Can you speak more about what you've seen to make for successful homemaking or homemaking as you describe it?
Yeah, I think, as I said, for most students, it's going to have, when you think about when students go on a college search and they have a sense of, this is a good fit for me, right? Or I think I'll fit in. It's kind of taking that as a starting place and seeing if that's actually what it's going to be for you. I think many students who find it difficult at the beginning think that they're going to have that good fit, and it doesn't feel so readily available to them. So I think that, again, good homemaking necessitates resilience and thoughtfulness about what matters to you in terms of being connected to a place. For some people, that's friendships. For some people, that's work. For some people, that has to do with familiarity, and it can only be gained over a period of time. There are a lot of ways about it. But I think that, making that a purposeful question, I don't think most students think of that as a question when they come to college. And I think it's a great opportunity. As I would argue, I didn't say this at the end, but college is a place where you can try on lots of different selves, and you can discard some and keep others, and you can even go back to ones that you had before. And I think that if we give more the message of that, it's not just, this isn't working for me, but why isn't it working, and what is important to me about a sense of belonging here. It's a much more fruitful way for them to think about things. And again, I think Oma's case is pretty instructive because she goes to college and she never expects to call it home. Very blatant about that. But she realized over time, it was more of a home than she had given it credit for. it just wasn't linked to the other kinds of things she saw other kids doing. The social scene was not her scene, and she needed to find a way into that place, which she did, in part because of choices that she made, and in part because of things that happened her way. So, anything else? Yep.
Well, a follow-up to that would be, do you see a difference in this generation that still has so much contact to either real home or high school friends, or how the social media link, even Skype, makes all of those old connections so real?
Yeah, and that's a really good question too. It kind of dates us a little bit because these are students who graduated in 2010. Most of them did, and how old? And so much has happened since 2010 in terms of, ways in people that can connect and do things. And if you think about it again, they started college in 2006. That even makes it different because the picture we get from our students is not the media picture of helicopter parents as they enter college. They find the connections to parents incredibly useful and valuable to them as they start college. They become more targeted around social support and less around academic support very quickly because they realize that parents really can't tell them what courses to register for, don't have a deep knowledge of that. But there's no doubt that there are some things going on that we would never see in these data because they just happen to be old enough now in terms of connection to people. They're just, I wish I knew more about that, and I don't. But certainly, again, in terms of social support, parents play an incredibly useful role. In the chapter on advice, we talk a good deal about this because they know their kid better than anybody, right? And students know that, so they really value what their parents can offer them in terms of starting college and maintaining support for college. Please.
I think a lot of the observations you make are extremely good and wonderful. I'm just wondering what the general conclusion is, because it seems like in every case you cite, college is one step of kind of self-discovery and learning about others as well as yourself, more importantly. And there's really, it's so complex, it's hard to put a blueprint formula on each individual case. So, like in the case with Oma, I think she learns a lot from that experience, regardless of whether she comes in with an initial bias that she can't make this place her home or anything, but she learns certain things, and that's a good thing, I think. And so, are you saying looking back she should apply this blueprint to her experience to make it better? Or to me, it seems like the path she took was a great learning experience and will prepare her for the next step, because college is just one step. So I'm just trying to figure out, is the conclusion a bunch of good observations, or is it, because it just seems like it's part of life, and the answer is it's very much trial and error in many cases. So I'm just wondering what the conclusion is, aside from the great observations you made.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to where it started, which is how do you view the decisions you make in college? And do you see them as opportunities to change, reflect, and think about what they meant, or do you not? And I think that that's a very simple premise, but it's one that, again, all of us have a hard time doing that in our lives. And I think that the reason that some people turn out the way they do in college is because they either choose that path, which is a path, or not in certain ways. And again, the advising example I gave you is a good counter example to that. This guy did not use college as an opportunity to think about people have useful things to offer you wherever you go and from whatever point of view that you might take. And he basically is not able to establish a mentoring relationship while in college. And we found with some students who do that, or don't fail to do that, in the 5-year out interviews, they're talking about that. I still don't have a mentor. I still don't know how to ask people for the things to get where I get. So I think it's, you're right, there's no set of rules to follow. We're very much opposed to arguing that kind of thing, but we do believe that simply reflecting on decisions that you make and using them as opportunities to change are really helpful. And I don't think that's something that every student does. I also don't want you to think that it's totally the student's responsibility to do all these things. As many of you have asked, I think colleges have a great deal of responsibility as well to help promote that kind of growth in students while they're in college. It's both of those things, I think. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your time at Wellesley. Thank you.